I've got a clear fix on them now.
Switch them.
We just give up, is that it? We put our lives into this project.
I'm not going to commit murder.
Not now, he'd burn alive. George, start the countdown.
Imagine a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Two scientists spinning through time, and the fate of history hanging in the balance. That's how millions of Americans spent their Friday nights back in 1966, glued to their TV sets watching The Time Tunnel. The show couldn't have hit the airwaves at a better moment. America was neck-deep in the space race, science fiction was everywhere, and TV audiences were hungry for what-if scenarios. ABC threw serious money at this project, $185,000 per episode, to build that massive, mind-bending tunnel set that became the show's iconic centerpiece. What made The Time Tunnel special wasn't just its ambitious premise. While other shows played it safe, this one dared to ask, what if we could mess with history? From the bombing of Pearl Harbor to the sinking of the Titanic, our heroes Dr. Tony Newman and Dr. Doug Phillips found themselves facing history's greatest moments, powerless to change what they knew was coming. Think about it. In 1966, with the Cold War raging and technology advancing rapidly, a show about scientists working on a secret government project that could change history struck a nerve. It wasn't just entertainment. It was holding up a mirror to America's hopes and fears about where progress was taking us. Though it only ran for one season, those 30 episodes of time-traveling adventure would influence everything from Quantum Leap to Doctor Who. Sometimes the brightest stars burn the fastest, but their light travels forever. And that's exactly what happened with this groundbreaking series. And that's where our story begins, with two men lost in time, a team desperately trying to bring them home, and a tunnel that would change television science fiction forever. Remember that iconic shot where Dr. Newman tumbles into the middle of Pearl Harbor, with real World War II footage seamlessly blending into the studio action? Or when the time tunnel's swirling vortex first powers up, its hypnotic rings pulsing with electric blue light? These weren't just cool scenes. They were groundbreaking television magic of 1966. The show's crown jewel was the $500,000 tunnel set itself. Picture a 60-foot-long corridor of 42 concentric rings, each rigged with over 100 lights that could pulse in sequence. The tunnel's design, by art director Jack Martin Smith, incorporated revolutionary fiber optics, a technology barely 5 years old at the time. The effect was so convincing that other shows started borrowing the technique. The lights were rated at 124,000 watts total. They heated up the studio so much that special air conditioning units had to be installed, just to keep the actors from overheating in their period costumes. The show's visual effects team, numbering 22 people, was one of the largest for any TV series of the era. They pioneered miniature photography techniques that would later become industry standards. For instance, the Project Tic-Tac complex model used forced perspective and measured 40 feet across, making it one of the largest TV miniatures built in the 1960s. The Time Tunnel revolutionized special effects with its innovative mix of practical techniques and archival footage. The production team, led by L.B. Abbott, who won an Emmy for his work on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, developed a unique approach. They'd source historical footage from the 20th Century Fox archives, then meticulously match the lighting and camera angles in their studio shots. They maintained a database of over 50,000 feet of stock footage, categorized by historical period and event. The chroma key work was revolutionary for 1960s television. Those famous sequences where Tony and Doug float through the time vortex used an early version of green screen technology called traveling matte, requiring perfect synchronization between the camera operators and actors. Each 10-second tunnel sequence took nearly a full day to shoot perfectly. The team used a proprietary time blend technique that combined up to 7 separate film elements in a single shot, a process that would cost over $50,000 per episode in today's money. The production design team, led by William Kreeber, created over 300 unique set pieces during the series run. Project TikTok Space required 5 permanent sets spread across 2 sound stages at Fox Studios, making it one of the most extensive standing sets for a TV show at that time. The art department, working with a weekly budget of around $185,000 per episode, became masters of repurposing, transforming the same core set pieces from ancient Rome to the Old West through clever redressing techniques. Sound design was equally innovative. The distinctive tunnel sound effect combined 12 separate audio tracks, including processed white noise, reversed thunder, and the slowed-down roar of a lion. The show's music library contained over 200 original pieces composed specifically for different historical periods, making it one of the most extensive TV music collections of its time. Color coordination was crucial for the series' success in the new color TV era. The costume department, headed by Theodora Van Runkel, developed a specialized era-specific color palette system that helped viewers subconsciously identify different time periods. They maintained an inventory of over 1,000 period costumes, worth approximately $2 million in today's currency. Every episode required precise coordination between multiple units. The effects team typically began work 3 weeks before filming, preparing complicated sequences that would be shot simultaneously by up to 3 different units. This parallel filming technique, while common today, was innovative for 1960s television production. The heart of the time tunnel beats through its perfectly matched lead duo. James Darren, fresh from his teen idol days singing Goodbye Cruel World, surprised everyone by bringing real depth to Dr. Tony Newman. The impulsive scientist who couldn't resist stepping into the tunnel himself became Darren's defining role. Though here's an interesting tidbit, he beat out 768 other actors for the part after producer Irwin Allen saw him in a dramatic episode of The Fugitive. Robert Colbert as Dr. Doug Phillips has an even more fascinating casting story. He replaced Michael Rennie after the pilot episode Rendezvous with Yesterday. The original version, filmed with Rennie, cost $520,000, making it one of the most expensive pilots of its time. When Rennie left due to contract disputes, Colbert was brought in and the pilot was partially reshot. The chemistry between Colbert and Darren was so electric that Allen reportedly said, "Sometimes mistakes are better than plans." Lee Meriwether's Dr. Anne McGregor broke new ground for female characters in science fiction. Meriwether, who had previously played Catwoman in the 1966 Batman film, brought gravitas to the role that transcended the typical woman in science tropes of the era. Her character was originally written as a lab assistant, but Meriwether fought for more scientific dialogue and involvement in the plots. By episode 10, Dr. McGregor was solving complex equations and making crucial decisions that saved the time travelers. Whit Bissell and John Zaremba, as the Project TikTok leaders, brought gravitas to the control room scenes. Bissell, who had appeared in over 300 films and TV shows, insisted on understanding the scientific principles behind his dialogue. He worked with technical advisors to ensure his delivery of complex scientific concepts felt authentic. The production team actually created a 50-page time tunnel technical manual to help the actors understand their roles. Guest stars included several who would later become major celebrities. A young Martin Sheen appeared in The Death Trap as a Civil War soldier. Robert Duvall played a World War II German officer in The Ghost of Nero. Even Star Trek's Leonard Nimoy appeared in an unaired pilot segment as a time-displaced scientist. The show's writing team, led by William Welch, developed a complex temporal physics Bible that guided the show's internal logic about time travel. They established rules like the Paradox Protocol. Characters couldn't change known history, but could influence events whose outcomes weren't recorded. These guidelines influenced later time travel shows like Quantum Leap and Doctor Who. Many scenes required actors to perform complex historical reenactments. The cast underwent periodic historical immersion sessions with experts to ensure authentic behavior for different time periods. James Darren spent 3 weeks learning period-specific military protocols for episodes involving different wars. When The Time Tunnel first aired in September 1966, critics weren't quite sure what to make of it. Variety called it ambitious but uneven, while the New York Times praised its special effects but questioned its historical accuracy. The show went head-to-head with The Wild Wild West on CBS and The Man from UNCE Asalo E on NBC. Tough competition in the Friday night 8 p.m. slot, where it averaged a 32 share of the audience despite the fierce competition. The Nielsen ratings tell an interesting story. The premiere episode, Rendezvous with Yesterday, drew 19.2 million viewers, making it ABC's highest-rated premiere of 1966. Subsequent episodes maintained a steady average of 17.5 million viewers, but faced stiff competition from CBS's Wild Wild West, which typically drew 19.8 million viewers in the same time slot. Initially, historical purists had a field day pointing out anachronisms. TV Guide's review of Episode 7, Revenge of the Gods, sparked particular controversy for its portrayal of ancient Greece, leading to over 2,000 letters from classical scholars and history teachers. The show's science advisors, Dr. Robert Wood and Dr. Harold Leinbach, defended the series in a famous Scientific American article, arguing that entertainment value sometimes had to trump strict historical accuracy. The series evolved significantly over its 30 episodes. Early installments focused more on pure adventure, but later episodes tackled deeper themes. Ratings data shows an interesting pattern. Episodes dealing with 20th century events, like The Day the Sky Fell In, about Pearl Harbor, consistently scored higher ratings than episodes set in ancient history. The show's international reception was particularly strong. It was broadcast in 47 countries, dubbed into 12 languages, and became especially popular in Japan, where it influenced several anime series. The Japanese version even had a different theme song and unique opening credits. Focus group data from 1967 revealed interesting demographic patterns. While the show attracted the expected young male audience, ages 12 to 24, it also had surprisingly strong appeal among women aged 25 to 34, who appreciated the historical romance elements occasionally worked into the plots. Critics' opinions shifted as the season progressed. Television Weekly's mid-season review noted marked improvement in storytelling sophistication, while Broadcasting Magazine praised the show's ambitious integration of historical footage with new material. The show's cancellation sparked one of the largest fan letter writing campaigns of the 1960s, with over 200,000 letters sent to ABC. Despite this, the network's investment in color programming and rising production costs averaging $185,000 per episode made renewal financially unfeasible. The series found new life in syndication, where its self-contained episodes proved perfect for reruns. By 1975, it was airing in 125 domestic markets and had been rescreened in most major international territories. A 1976 viewer survey showed that 68% of audiences preferred The Time Tunnel to newer science fiction programs, citing its practical effects and historical elements as major draws. Television historians note that The Time Tunnel was one of the first shows to develop what we now call stealth education, teaching historical facts through entertainment. A 1968 study found that regular viewers scored 23% higher on history tests, covering periods featured in the show. You can trace The Time Tunnel's DNA in almost every time travel show that followed. Quantum Leap creator Donald P. Bellisario openly admitted that watching Tony and Doug jump through history inspired Sam Beckett's adventures. When NBC launched Timeless in 2016, critics immediately dubbed it The Time Tunnel for a New Generation. Even recent shows like DC's Legends of Tomorrow follow that same template. Time travelers witnessing, but not changing major historical events. The show's influence on practical effects remains significant. Modern productions like Stranger Things and Doctor Who have deliberately mimicked the tunnel's practical lighting effects rather than using CGI, proving that sometimes old school just looks cooler. The original tunnel design has been referenced in over 50 different TV shows and films, from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure to Austin Powers. Today's viewers find new relevance in the show's themes. The ethical dilemmas faced by Project TikTok staff mirror our own debates about government secrets and scientific responsibility. Episodes like The Day the Sky Fell In resonate with modern discussions about historical trauma and the responsibility of witnesses to history. The show's mix of entertainment and education sparked what media scholars now call stealth learning. While Tony and Doug's adventures played loose with historical accuracy, they got millions of viewers interested in real events. This approach is now standard practice for historical content creators on YouTube and streaming platforms. In the realm of scientific influence, the time tunnel actually predicted several technological developments. The show's computer displays, designed by NASA consultant Frank Moran, anticipated modern touchscreens. Their temporal displacement theory shares similarities with current quantum physics theories, and the project's voice-activated computer interface predicted modern AI assistants. The series has maintained a strong presence in popular culture. The distinctive tunnel sound effect has been sampled in over 30 different electronic music tracks, while Japanese anime series like Steins Gate directly reference the show's visual style. Gaming franchises like Assassin's Creed use similar concepts of viewing historical events without changing them. What many don't know are the fascinating behind-the-scenes stories that have become legendary among sci-fi enthusiasts. The tunnel set was so powerful, it caused blackouts in the surrounding Culver City neighborhood during initial testing, leading to the installation of a dedicated power grid. A real-life physicist became so intrigued by the show's concepts that he sent Irwin Allen a 28-page letter explaining how the tunnel could theoretically work using quantum mechanics. The Department of Defense even briefly investigated the show's special effects techniques for possible military applications in camouflage technology. The production was plagued by strange occurrences that added to its mystique. An entire episode was filmed underwater but scrapped due to technical difficulties. The footage remains lost to this day. The show's computer props were so convincing that NASA borrowed some designs for a public exhibition. During filming, 3 different crew members reported experiencing temporal displacement sensations from the strobe lighting effects, leading to new safety protocols for television production. Perhaps most intriguingly, a dedicated fan club in the 1970s actually attempted to build a working replica of the tunnel in an abandoned missile silo, though they only succeeded in creating an impressive light show. James Darren later claimed that during one scene, the tunnel's lighting sequence accidentally hypnotized 2 crew members, though this story might be embellished by years of retelling. These fascinating elements, combined with the show's enduring influence on science fiction and popular culture, cement the time tunnel as more than just another 1960s TV show. It was a glimpse into the future of television production, storytelling, and our endless fascination with time travel. And so, the legacy of the time tunnel continues to ripple through time, influencing new generations of storytellers and sci-fi enthusiasts. While Tony and Doug may still be lost somewhere in the time stream, their adventures remind us why we fell in love with science fiction in the first place. That perfect blend of imagination, adventure, and the endless possibilities of what if?
All hands, stand by for severe shockwave. Here it comes. What's going on down there?
The controls malfunctioned. I can't explain it.
Imagine a massive submarine burst through thick Arctic ice, its sleek gray hull glistening against the frozen wasteland. That's how millions of Americans first met the SRN Seaview back in 1964. And what a meeting it was. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea wasn't just another sci-fi show.
Voyage to the bottom of the sea.
It was ABC's big bet on the future of television. You've got to understand what TV was like back then. The space race was in full swing. Kennedy's dream of reaching the moon had captured everyone's imagination, and science fiction was evolving from bug-eyed monsters to something more ambitious. ABC knew they needed something special to compete, and boy, did Irwin Allen deliver. The story behind getting this show made is pretty wild. Allen had already done the Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea movie in '61, but converting it into a TV series, that was a whole different challenge. We're talking about a time when most shows were still in black and white, and here comes Allen, insisting on full color, demanding movie-quality special effects on a TV budget. The network thought he was crazy until they saw the numbers. The fascinating thing about Voyage is how it captured that unique moment in American culture. The Cold War was making everyone nervous about nuclear submarines, but at the same time, people were dreaming about exploration and scientific breakthroughs. The show tapped into both those fears and hopes perfectly. You had Admiral Nelson and his crew dealing with everything from Soviet agents to sea monsters, and somehow it all made perfect sense. But what really set Voyage apart was its incredible ambition. This wasn't just guys in a submarine. This was a full-on weekly adventure series with effects that would make Star Trek jealous a few years later. And speaking of effects, you know that gorgeous Seaview model they used? It was 11 feet long and cost more than some actual boats. That's the kind of commitment we're talking about. The best part? This wasn't just empty spectacle. The show hit right when America was wrestling with big questions about technology, military power, and our place in the world. And what better way to explore those ideas than through the adventures of a high-tech submarine crew who might have to save the world on any given week? And here's something that'll blow your mind. Real submarine commanders actually wrote to the show saying some of their crew members had been inspired to join the Navy after watching Voyage. Talk about life imitating art. You know how every now and then something comes along that just perfectly captures its moment in time? That's what Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea did. It wasn't just a TV show, it was a window into that incredible, optimistic, slightly scared, totally fascinating moment in American history when anything seemed possible, even finding monsters at the bottom of the sea. So next time someone tries to tell you TV was simpler back then, just remember, this was a show that dared to dream bigger than anything we'd seen before. And in many ways, we're still trying to catch up to that dream today. The diving bell sequence in episode 17 still takes my breath away. A tiny metal sphere descending into the inky darkness, lights flickering against the endless black of the deep ocean. That's the magic of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And it all came down to some seriously clever techniques that changed TV forever. Let's talk about that gorgeous Seaview model first. The Hero model was an 11-foot marvel of engineering that cost a small fortune. The attention to detail was incredible. Every window, every rivet, even the way water moved around it was carefully planned. They actually built multiple versions. The Hero model for surface shots, a smaller one for underwater work, and even a specialized one just for those dramatic ice-breaking scenes. But here's where it gets really interesting. Filming those underwater sequences was a nightmare that turned into innovation. They couldn't afford to film everything in actual water tanks like movies did, so they got creative. The effects team developed this amazing technique using smoke, careful lighting, and specialized camera movements to create the illusion of being underwater. When you watch the show now, you can sometimes spot how they did it, but back then, it was revolutionary. The sets themselves were another triumph of imagination over budget. The control room of the Seaview wasn't just a set, it was a character in its own right. Those massive windows looking out into the ocean, actually clever rear projection screens, the sophisticated control panels. Many actually worked, and that famous Periscope Island became iconic. Fun fact, they had to rebuild portions of the set multiple times because the ambitious filming schedule literally wore them out. David Hedison, who played Captain Crane, insisted on doing many of his own stunts, which added another layer of realism. There's this fantastic scene where he has to escape a flooding compartment. That's real water, real tension, and a real actor fighting his way through it. No CGI, no tricks, just old school filmmaking at its finest. The visual effects team faced constant challenges. How do you show a giant sea monster attacking a submarine on a TV budget? They combined miniature work, practical effects, and some really innovative camera techniques. Sometimes they'd film through aquariums to get that underwater distortion effect. Other times they'd use forced perspective to make models look massive. Sure, some effects might look dated now, but the creativity behind them is still impressive. One of the most groundbreaking aspects was their use of color. Remember, this was early in color TV's history, and Voyage pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They used color not just for show, but as a storytelling tool. The deep blues of ocean scenes, the harsh reds of alert situations, the eerie greens of mysterious underwater phenomena. It set a standard that science fiction shows would follow for decades. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement was how they maintained this quality week after week. This wasn't a movie with months to perfect a few effect shots. They had to turn out episode after episode, each requiring complex effects work, on a TV schedule and budget. The fact that they pulled it off, and often with stunning results, is nothing short of remarkable. If there's one scene that perfectly captures the magic of the cast, it's when Admiral Nelson, Richard Basehart, and Captain Crane, David Hedison, face off in The Creature. There's this electric tension between them as they argue about whether to surface or dive deeper, with Nelson's scientific curiosity clashing against Crane's military caution. It's like watching two storms collide, and it's absolutely riveting. Richard Basehart wasn't anyone's first choice for Admiral Nelson. Can you believe that? The studio wanted a more traditional military type, but Basehart brought something special to the role. He had this way of making even the most outlandish scientific explanations sound completely believable. There's this wonderful story about how he used to spend hours with real naval officers, learning how they carried themselves, how they gave orders. It shows in every episode, that perfect mix of brilliant scientist and commanding officer. David Hedison as Captain Crane was another stroke of genius. He could have played Crane as just another square-jawed action hero, but instead, he gave us this complex character who was both a man of action and someone deeply loyal to his crew and his admiral. The chemistry between Hedison and Basehart was incredible. Even though off-screen, they sometimes drove each other crazy with their different acting styles. Then, there's Robert Dowdle as Lieutenant Commander Chip Morton. He didn't get as much spotlight as the others, but he was the glue that held the show together. Morton was the guy who made you believe this was a real submarine crew, not just actors playing dress-up. There's this fantastic episode, The Fear Makers, where Morton has to take command when both Nelson and Crane are incapacitated. Dowdle absolutely nails it. The most memorable scenes often came from the unexpected moments. Like in The Sky's on Fire, when Nelson has to convince the world that his crazy plan to save Earth might actually work. Or that incredible sequence in Turn Back the Clock, where the entire crew finds themselves facing a prehistoric sea monster. These weren't just Monster of the Week stories. They were character studies wrapped in science fiction. What's fascinating is how the cast dealt with the show's gradual shift from serious Cold War drama to more fantastical stories. Instead of fighting it, they leaned into it, finding ways to make even the most outrageous scenarios feel grounded. Basehart especially had had this knack for delivering lines about underwater aliens with the same gravity he'd use for a military crisis. The casting process itself was pretty dramatic. They actually shot 2 different pilots with slightly different casts before settling on the final lineup. And get this. Hedison initially turned down the role of Crane 3 times. He only agreed after they promised him the character would be more than just a typical action hero. But what really made the cast special was how they created this family dynamic aboard the Seaview. Whether they were facing Soviet spies or sea monsters, you believed these people had lived and worked together, trusted each other with their lives. That's not just good acting, that's lightning in a bottle. When Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea first hit TV screens, critics weren't quite sure what to make of it. Here was this expensive, ambitious show that started out as a serious Cold War thriller with submarines, and somehow ended up giving us episodes about evil puppets and radioactive whales. But you know what? The audience loved it. The show's evolution is fascinating. Those early episodes were straight-up military sci-fi, tense standoffs with foreign submarines, nuclear threats, espionage. The Fear Makers pulled in massive ratings with its claustrophobic story about psychological warfare. Critics praised its realistic approach to Cold War tensions. The New York Times even called it surprisingly sophisticated for a science fiction program. But then something interesting happened. As the real Cold War got scarier, the show went in the opposite direction. By season 2, we're getting more monsters, time travel, and alien visitors. Some TV critics were horrified. I found this amazing quote from 1966 where someone called it a descent into creature feature absurdity. Meanwhile, the ratings just kept climbing. Nobody talks about this, but the show was actually competing head-to-head with Star Trek for a while. While Trek was struggling with ratings, Voyage was pulling in solid numbers with its mix of action and monsters. The network was thrilled, even if some of the original writers were pulling their hair out. Here's a cool detail most people miss. The real US Navy had consultants working on the show, especially in the first season. They were super invested in how submarines were portrayed on TV. But as the show got wilder, the Navy quietly backed away. Can't blame them. Hard to maintain military accuracy when you're dealing with undersea werewolves. The show's props and costumes have an interesting story too. They kept recycling and modifying them throughout the series. That alien spacesuit from season 2? Look closely. It shows up again as a deep-sea diving suit in season 3. Budget constraints led to some pretty creative solutions. One controversial element was how the show handled scientific accuracy. Early episodes made a real effort to get the science right with technical advisors on set. But as the stories got more fantastic, that went out the window. Some fans loved the change, others hated it. Sound familiar? We're still having these exact same debates about sci-fi shows today. The most fascinating thing about Voyage's reception is how it changed over time. What was dismissed as silly in the late 60s is now appreciated for its imagination and practical effects. Modern viewers often point out how the show predicted real underwater exploration technology. Those unrealistic submarine designs, they don't look so crazy now that we have actual deep-sea research vessels. And here's a wild detail. Some episodes were considered so intense that they were edited differently for afternoon reruns. The famous giant octopus attack? The afternoon version cut out nearly 2 minutes of excessive underwater terror. Times sure have changed. You can't talk about modern submarine stories without mentioning Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Take SeaQuest DSV. It's basically Voyage's spiritual child, right down to the massive underwater vessel and the mix of military protocol with fantastic adventures. Even The Hunt for Red October borrowed some visual DNA from how Voyage filmed those tense underwater sequences, but the show's real legacy goes deeper than just inspiring other submarine stories. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was doing climate change episodes before most people even knew what that meant. Remember those episodes about melting polar ice caps and extreme weather? They hit different now, don't they? There's this eerily prophetic episode, The Heat Monster. that feels like it could have been written yesterday. The show's practical effects work still influences filmmakers today. James Cameron, has talked about how watching Voyage as a kid sparked his interest in underwater filming. Those miniature shots of the sea view cutting through Arctic ice, that's the grandfather of modern practical effects work. Sure, we use computers now, but the principles of how to make underwater action look good, that all started here. What's really wild is how the show predicted real technology. Those underwater research labs the Seaview kept visiting? We have those now. The deep sea rescue operations? Standard procedure for modern navies. Even some of their crazy scientific instruments have real-world counterparts today. The show's designers were basically sketching out blueprints for the future. The show also left us with some important questions that we're still wrestling with. How do we balance military power with scientific progress? What responsibilities do we have to our oceans? How do we face the unknown without losing our humanity? These aren't just sci-fi questions anymore. They're our daily reality. In a way, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was more than just a TV show. It was a window into our own future, both the hopes and the fears. And while we might not have flying submarines or sea monsters, that we know of, we're living in a world that Voyage helped us imagine first. You know what's funny? Back in the 60s, people thought the show was too far-fetched. Now, we're actually living in a world where some of its wildest ideas don't seem so wild anymore. Makes you wonder, what crazy thing from today's sci-fi will turn out to be tomorrow's reality? If you're enjoying these deep dives into classic sci-fi, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are plenty more amazing shows from the past that deserve a fresh look through modern eyes. Until next time, keep exploring.